The house was slowly quieting down after the bustling chaos of Liam's birthday party, and Emma moved through the rooms with a soft sigh, gathering empty cups, scattered napkins, and the remnants of cake that had been hastily devoured earlier in the evening, trying to return some sense of order after hours of laughter, music, and excited chatter that had filled every corner with life, the way it always did when Liam invited his friends over, and she had smiled watching them chase each other around, their energy almost contagious, making her feel lighter than usual as she set the chairs back in place and folded napkins, her mind drifting briefly to how quickly her son had grown, how the years seemed to pass in moments like this, where the ordinary became magical simply through the sound of joy and the warmth of family, and she thought about how these parties were more than celebrations, they were reminders that life moved forward, that even amid her busy routine she could find moments of happiness and connection, and as she walked into the living room to straighten a few balloons that had slipped from their strings, she noticed a figure on the sofa, still sitting there as if frozen in thought, and it took her a second to register who it was before recognition dawned, her eyes landing on Ethan, Liam's closest friend, whose presence there was unexpected now that the party had officially ended and everyone else had said their goodbyes, the last echoes of music fading from the speakers and leaving the room in a gentle hush that made the soft hum of the ceiling fan seem louder, and for a moment Emma felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with concern, wondering why he hadn't left yet. And as she approached him, she noticed the unusual seriousness in his posture, the way his hands were folded loosely in his lap, his gaze downcast but occasionally flicking up toward her with a hesitant intensity, a mixture of shyness and something she couldn't quite name, and she cleared her throat softly, forcing a smile she hoped looked casual, offering him a cup of tea that she had just poured, feeling an unexpected nervousness in her chest as she placed the cup on the table in front of him, and Ethan looked up, meeting her eyes briefly before nodding with a small, almost apologetic smile, and she felt an odd warmth in that fleeting connection, a recognition that tonight might hold more than just the ordinary end-of-party moments she had grown accustomed to over the years. As she took a seat opposite him, the room bathed in the soft glow of the lamps, the shadows stretching across the walls like they were listening to the unspoken tension, and she wondered silently what had prompted him to stay behind, why he seemed so hesitant to leave, as if some invisible barrier held him there, and Ethan shifted slightly, his fingers tapping lightly against the cup, a rhythm that betrayed the thoughts running fast and anxious in his mind, and Emma leaned back, curious, but careful, sensing that whatever he had to say might not be simple small talk, that this quiet moment carried weight, the kind that can quietly shift the balance of familiarity into something more charged and delicate, and she reminded herself to breathe, to stay grounded, even as her heart began to beat a little faster with anticipation, because there was something in his presence, in the way he avoided her gaze but could not fully look away, that felt magnetic, drawing her attention in, despite herself, and she realized that the room felt smaller now, more intimate, filled with invisible threads of emotion that neither of them had yet named, and as she sipped her own tea, trying to appear casual, she caught a glimpse of Ethan's expression shifting, from nervous avoidance to a fleeting moment of courage, a spark that made her pulse quicken, and she sensed that the words he was holding back were important, that they carried meaning beyond the ordinary, beyond the polite and expected, and her mind raced with possibilities, wondering what kind of thoughts a boy his age could harbor about someone like her, someone much older, someone who had seen heartbreak, loss, and quiet victories over the years, yet here she was, feeling suddenly vulnerable in the presence of a teenager who somehow made her feel alive, young again, remembered, and appreciated in a way that had nothing to do with the years she had lived but everything to do with the moment unfolding in front of her, and she noticed the way his shoulders tensed, then relaxed slightly as if he had made a small decision. Internally, a choice to speak, to break the invisible wall of hesitation that had kept him seated in silence, and Emma's chest tightened with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation, wondering what exactly he would say, how honest he would be, and if this moment would change the ordinary rhythm of her life even slightly, for she had spent years protecting herself from emotional turbulence, from the kind of longing and attraction that had always seemed dangerous, complicated, or inconvenient. And yet here it was arriving unbidden in the form of a quiet boy sitting across from her, his tea cooling slowly, the warm amber color reflecting the soft light, and she felt a pull toward him, not just out of sympathy or care, but something deeper, something instinctive and human, a recognition of shared emotions, the way hearts can sometimes understand each other even when logic and circumstance suggest otherwise, and she reminded herself gently that this was just a conversation, a moment in time, yet her mind spun with all the possibilities, imagining the things he might confess, the feelings he might reveal, the subtle truths hidden behind his shy expressions and hesitant movements, and she realized that life had a way of surprising even those who thought they had seen it all, that quiet moments like these, unexpected and seemingly ordinary, could carry the weight of emotions that shifted everything, that made the heart beat faster, the mind race and the soul feel both lighter and heavier at the same time, and she leaned forward slightly, signaling her readiness to listen, to engage, to meet him where he was emotionally, and Ethan's gaze finally settled fully on hers, a mixture of fear and hope flickering in his eyes, as if he were testing the waters, gauging whether he could safely share the thoughts and feelings he had carried in silence, and Emma found herself silently encouraging him, her own nerves entwined with curiosity and empathy, as the room held its breath around them, the soft ticking of the clock marking the passage of time, each second stretching long with anticipation, and she realized that this was the start of something fragile yet profound, the kind of moment that could linger in memory long after the tea had gone cold, long after the house returned to its quiet, empty state, and she felt a subtle thrill in the awareness that tonight, the ordinary and the extraordinary had collided, that a birthday party, which should have ended in the usual farewells and laughter fading into the night, had instead created a pause, a stillness, where hearts could speak softly, honestly, and without pretense, and she took a slow breath, bracing herself for the confession she sensed was coming, her emotions a mix of excitement, fear, and something unnameable, while Ethan, gathering courage slowly, lifted his eyes fully to hers, the weight of the words he had held back pressing against the fragile barrier of silence. And in that suspended, quiet moment, both of them realized that life had presented them with a rare opportunity, a chance to connect in a way that felt intimate, poignant, and unforgettable. And as Emma adjusted her chair slightly, signaling her full attention and willingness to listen, she felt the air in the room shift, charged now with the unspoken understanding that whatever Ethan was about to say could change the tone of the evening, her own heart, and perhaps even the rhythm of their relationship going forward. And in that instant time seemed both fast and slow, the ordinary party fading into a background of warm memories while the focus narrowed sharply on the two of them, alone yet together, suspended between curiosity and revelation, anticipation and fear, and Emma, with her hands loosely folded in her lap, braced herself, ready to receive whatever words Ethan had kept inside all evening, sensing that tonight would be remembered, not for the games or laughter, but for the quiet, tender, and emotionally charged conversation that was about to begin, the one that neither of them expected, the one that could gently, irrevocably, touch their hearts in ways both subtle and profound. And as Ethan finally opened his mouth, his voice barely above a whisper, the moment seemed to hang in the air, fragile and precious, and Emma leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed on him, heart open, ready to listen, and in that quiet living room, the last remnants of the Parithan's fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the cup of tea Emma had placed before him, his eyes darting to hers and then away, caught between the desire to speak and the fear of what his words might cause, and Emma sat quietly, sensing the weight of the moment, her heart a mixture of curiosity, caution, and an unexpected warmth, because there was a vulnerability about him that seemed rare for someone his age, something raw and honest, and it drew her in despite the years that separated them, despite the careful boundaries she had always maintained. And finally, after what felt like a pause suspended in time, Ethan spoke, his voice soft, almost hesitant, as though each word required courage to release. "I've always admired your strength, your kindness." And Emma felt a sudden pull in her chest, a mixture of surprise and something unspoken, a recognition that she had been seen in ways she hadn't expected, and she tried to hide the sudden rush of emotion with a polite nod, but the warmth spreading through her made it impossible to remain entirely neutral, and she realized that this conversation, so unexpected, had already begun to touch parts of her heart she had long kept carefully protected. And Ethan continued, speaking now a little more confidently, telling her about the admiration he had felt for her over the years, how he noticed the small ways she cared for others, the way she smiled even when life had been hard, the way her presence brought a sense of calm and comfort to those around her. And Emma felt herself leaning forward, drawn into his words, wanting to encourage him, wanting to acknowledge the truth in them, but also afraid of the intensity of the emotions rising inside her, a mixture of pride, longing, and a hint of fear, because she had not anticipated that a simple act of staying behind after a party would lead to such a delicate and profound exchange, and she noticed the softness in his eyes, the way they seemed to plead for her understanding, to be met not with judgment but with empathy, and as he spoke about his fears, his dreams and the quiet feelings he carried about life and connection, Emma felt a gentle ache, a stirring in her heart that reminded her of long-forgotten moments of hope and longing, moments that had been buried under years of responsibility and routine, and she realized that this was more than just admiration or polite conversation. This was a rare, fragile connection forming in real time, a meeting of hearts in a quiet, unexpected moment, and she found herself listening intently, nodding occasionally, her mind racing with the possibilities of what this could mean, while also knowing that it existed in a delicate, temporary space, one that could not be forced or rushed. And Ethan, encouraged by her attentive presence, began to speak more freely, sharing small confessions, hints of emotions he could not fully name, words about the warmth he felt in her presence, about how he had always felt a quiet, almost unnoticeable bond with her, a sense of understanding and safety that he could not explain to anyone else. And Emma felt a strange combination of pride and tenderness, recognizing the beauty in the honesty of his feelings, yet also grappling with the complexity of the emotions arising within her, because there was something both innocent and profound in his openness, something that made her feel seen and remembered in a way she had not experienced in years. And as he continued, his voice gaining strength, he spoke of the subtle ways she had inspired him, how her laughter lingered in his memory, how her thoughtfulness and gentle demeanor made even the simplest moments feel meaningful. And Emma's heart swelled with an unfamiliar yet comforting feeling, a mixture of nostalgia and longing, and she realized that even though the age gap and circumstances made the connection complicated, there was something undeniably real in the exchange, something that resonated deeply in her soul, and she found herself wanting to encourage him, to reassure him that expressing these emotions was not only safe but meaningful, that the honesty he displayed was a rare gift, one that deserved recognition and respect. And Ethan, sensing her openness, took a small breath, a quiet courage filling him, and began to share more personal reflections, his tone intimate but careful, revealing his thoughts about life, family, and the longing for genuine connection that he sometimes felt alone in experiencing. And Emma listened, her eyes soft, her mind full, feeling both the excitement and weight of the moment, because she understood that such honesty could be transformative, that a single conversation, delivered with sincerity and vulnerability, could shift perspectives, ignite feelings, and leave lasting impressions. And as he spoke about moments he admired in her, the way she handled challenges, and the quiet strength she exuded, Emma felt a bittersweet mixture of emotions, because she recognized the beauty in the admiration yet also felt the caution of reality, the awareness that this was an extraordinary moment suspended in time, one that could not be replicated easily. And as she processed this, Ethan's gaze fell to his hands for a brief moment, then back up to her, his expression a careful balance of hope and apprehension, as though testing the waters. And Emma felt the same mirrored emotion, the desire to respond with warmth and understanding, tempered by the knowledge that patience, empathy, and care were required. And the quiet hum of the evening seemed to wrap around them, cocooning the room in a softness that allowed emotions to surface gently, without the intrusion of outside chaos. As they both sat there, the party long forgotten, the world outside fading into insignificance, leaving only the two of them in a fragile bubble of shared humanity, shared vulnerability, and emerging connection. And in the midst of it all, Emma realized that this was a moment to be fully present, to acknowledge the courage it took for him to speak, to honor the sincerity and depth of feeling. And she nodded subtly, a gesture that conveyed encouragement without words, which seemed to give Ethan the push he needed to continue, his voice growing steadier, more confident, as he spoke about the admiration he had felt over time, the respect, the quiet longing for guidance and understanding, and the way her presence made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. And Emma felt a rush of emotion, a recognition of how rare it was to encounter such openness, such unfiltered honesty. And she wished she could bottle this moment, preserve it, because there was a magic in the exchange that could not be planned or forced. It simply existed, alive between them, delicate yet profound. And as Ethan's words continued to flow, she noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor, a softening of the tension that had initially marked his posture, replaced now with the tentative hope that his feelings might be received, that his honesty could be acknowledged and understood. and Emma responded inwardly, matching his courage with her own patience, her own quiet attentiveness, understanding that the beauty of this encounter lay in its subtlety, its unspoken layers of emotion, the gentle recognition of connection that transcended age, circumstance, and expectation. And as Ethan leaned slightly forward, a new determination in his eyes, he shared thoughts about dreams he held privately, desires for growth, for understanding, and for the possibility of deeper connection in the future, and Emma's heart responded in kind, swelling with a gentle empathy, a recognition of shared human longing, and a quiet admiration for the bravery it took for him to voice these thoughts in the safety of her presence. And she realized that she, too, was experiencing a shift, a subtle awakening of feelings that she had long tucked away, emotions of care, tenderness, and gentle attraction that were neither rushed nor forced but naturally emerging from the honesty and depth of the moment. And as the evening wore on, the light outside dimming into night, the room filled only with the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the lingering warmth of tea and conversation, both of them felt the gravity of what was unfolding, a sense of intimacy that was heartfelt, respectful, and profound, a quiet bridge between hearts. And just as Ethan seemed ready to continue, to speak further and reveal even more of his inner thoughts, there was a soft, almost tentative knock at the door, and the sound sliced through the delicate tension like a gentle gust of wind through an open window, breaking the cocoon they had created, reminding them of the world outside, of obligations, of reality, and both of them paused, the words left hanging in the air, the confession unfinished, the moment paused, suspended between what had been said and what still needed to be spoken, and Emma's chest tightened with a mixture of regret, anticipation, and a strange exhilaration, realizing that the next step, the continuation of this heartfelt exchange, would require courage from both of them, patience and trust. And as she looked at Ethan, his expression a mixture of longing and hesitation, she understood that life had placed this moment in their path not by accident but as a rare gift, a chance to connect, to feel, to understand, and to recognize the fragile beauty of human emotion in its purest, unguarded form. And she resolved silently to honor the vulnerability before her, to meet it with compassion and grace, knowing that what would follow, whether spoken now or later, could leave an indelible mark on both of their hearts. And as the knock repeated softly, echoing through the quiet room, Emma took a deep breath, bracing herself for the interruption, yet holding on to the awareness that this conversation, these confessions, and the emotions they had stirred would linger long after the party had ended, long after the visitor had left, leaving behind a memory charged with tenderness, longing, and the gentle unspoken promise of more, the kind of memory that shaped the heart, quietly and profoundly, in ways that could not be measured but only felt deeply, gently, and forever. Fading into the night, the story of connection, longing, and unexpected emotion began, and nothing. The knock on the door had barely faded when Liam's cheerful voice called from the hallway, breaking the fragile intimacy that had enveloped the living room, and Emma's heart skipped in a mixture of surprise and regret, knowing that the quiet, tender moment she had been sharing with Ethan was suddenly interrupted. Yet the words he had spoken, the vulnerability he had shown, lingered in the air between them like a soft echo that refused to dissipate. And Ethan shifted slightly, his hands tightening around the cup of tea, eyes flicking toward the door with a mix of hesitation and longing, as if he knew the intrusion would change the delicate balance that had formed. And Emma, sensing the tension, gave him a small, reassuring smile, encouraging him to stay calm even as reality intruded, her chest still fluttering from the warmth of the conversation, from the quiet intensity of the emotions that had passed between them in those few stolen moments. And as Liam's footsteps approached, Ethan rose slowly, placing the cup on the table with a soft clink, his movements careful and deliberate, as if each action mattered in this suspended space. And Emma felt a pang of something she could not name, a mixture of longing and regret, because she realized that moments like these, rare and fleeting, could not be recreated at will, and the unspoken bond that had blossomed between them now faced the intrusion of everyday life, the ordinary obligations of a house and family. Yet it did not diminish the significance of what had occurred, for the emotions had been real, profound, and quietly transformative. And as Liam entered the room, cheerful and oblivious to the undercurrents of emotion, Ethan offered a polite nod, a small smile that carried both appreciation and a quiet hesitation, and Emma felt a mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing that the conversation could not continue openly in front of her son, yet aware that the impact of those words, those moments of honesty and connection, would linger far longer than the night itself. And as Liam settled on the sofa, chattering about something trivial from the party, Ethan's gaze met Emma's briefly, a silent exchange passing between them, full of meaning, acknowledgement, and the unspoken promise that this was not the end, that the emotions shared, the courage displayed, and the vulnerability revealed could one day be revisited, explored, and understood more fully. And Emma's heart responded in kind, swelling with quiet appreciation for the honesty and trust that Ethan had placed in her, for the gentle way he had opened his heart, revealing feelings that were rare, delicate, and profoundly human. And as she watched him leave the room moments later, grabbing his coat and stepping lightly toward the door, she felt an ache, a mixture of longing and hope, because she knew that life sometimes offered these brief, intense moments that left a lasting impression, that could shift perceptions, stir emotions, and awaken parts of the heart that had been dormant. And she realized that the memory of Ethan's words, the courage it took to speak them, and the sincerity in his eyes would linger with her, quietly shaping her thoughts, her feelings, and her understanding of connection. And as he paused at the door, glancing back with a soft, tentative smile, his voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I hope we can talk again." And Emma's chest tightened with a mixture of anticipation and tenderness, knowing that this was both a goodbye and a promise, a fleeting moment suspended in time that carried with it the weight of potential, the spark of something unspoken, and the hope of future understanding. And she nodded slightly, encouraging him silently, her own emotions a blend of exhilaration, caution, and recognition of the rare beauty in what had just transpired. And as he finally stepped out into the night, leaving the soft glow of the living room behind, Emma sank back onto the sofa, feeling the quiet hum of the house envelop her. Comforting yet poignant reminder of the fragile, delicate nature of human connection. And she allowed herself to breathe, to reflect, and to savor the intensity of the emotions that had filled the room, knowing that the evening had shifted something deep inside her, awakening a tenderness, a longing, and a quiet hope that perhaps the world could surprise her still, that even in the midst of ordinary life, moments of extraordinary emotion and connection could emerge unexpectedly. And she thought of Ethan, of the sincerity in his eyes, the courage in his voice, and the subtle yet profound way he had touched her heart. And she realized that sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind cannot yet name, that feelings can emerge in ways that are gentle, delicate, and entirely unexpected, and that this connection, fleeting though it might have seemed, held a significance that could ripple through days, months, and years, leaving a mark that was invisible yet unmistakable, a quiet imprint of shared vulnerability and human longing. And as she gazed at the door he had exited, the soft night settling outside the windows, she allowed herself to imagine future conversations, shared smiles, and moments where honesty and connection could flourish once more. Yet she remained grounded, aware that patience, understanding, and respect were essential, and that the beauty of this evening lay not in immediate resolution but in the delicate unfolding of emotions, the subtle recognition of shared humanity, and the tender, unspoken promises that lingered in glances, pauses, and soft words. And she thought about the way life could orchestrate such encounters, how ordinary evenings could transform into extraordinary memories, and how courage, honesty, and gentle vulnerability could create bonds that transcended circumstance, expectation, and even time itself. And she allowed herself a small, quiet smile, the memory of his words and the courage it took to say them warming her from within, filling the room with an invisible presence of hope and possibility. And as she sat alone, the soft hum of the fan the only sound, she realized that the evening, the conversation, and the unspoken understanding that had passed between them had not been a fleeting accident but a moment of true emotional resonance. And she welcomed the quiet ache of longing that accompanied it, understanding that it was a reminder of the depth of feeling the human heart was capable of. And she felt a subtle joy, a gentle thrill at the possibility of connection renewed, a sense of anticipation for what might come, tempered by wisdom, patience, and the respect for boundaries. And she reflected on how rare it was to encounter such honesty, how fragile and precious it was, and how much courage it required to open oneself to another. And in that quiet reflection, Emma felt a wave of gratitude for the experience, the emotions stirred, and the delicate, profound exchange that had transformed an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. And as the night deepened, shadows stretching across the walls, she allowed herself to linger in the memory, savoring the beauty, intensity, and gentle promise contained in a single conversation, knowing that it had the power to shape hearts, minds, and lives in ways subtle yet profound. and she closed her eyes briefly, letting the echo of Ethan's words resonate, the warmth of the shared vulnerability settling into her soul, and she understood, fully and deeply, that life's most extraordinary moments often arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and without warning, leaving traces that linger long after the world returns to ordinary rhythms, and that sometimes the heart knows before the mind, sensing connections that cannot yet be defined, feeling emotions that are both delicate and powerful, and that this evening, this conversation, this fleeting yet unforgettable encounter, would remain with her forever, a gentle, tender reminder of the beauty of honesty, the courage of vulnerability, and the quiet magic of human connection in its purest, most heartfelt form.